Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, you know who it is, and you're about to experience a new episode of the Needle Drop Podcast. On this podcast, our special guest in this episode is none other than Mr. Daveed Diggs, songwriter, lyricist, everything, man. He's on fucking Broadway now. He's involved in the new Hamilton musical, and we ask him about that, as well as Clipping, who you know is a experimental hip-hop trio that he is also involved with, that I've reviewed a few times before. So, you know, we talk with him about Hamilton and Clipping and music and some of his solo ambitions and kind of just where his head has been at since we last talked with him, or we last heard from him with the sophomore full-length Clipping record. So if you want to support this podcast, there are a few ways you can do so. You can do what you're doing now. Watch it on YouTube, comment, like, subscribe, share it. You can hit up the Amazon Associates link down there in the description. If you live in the U.S., anything you buy off Amazon, we get kickback from it. Supports the podcast, supports my buddy Austin, who helps update the website. You can also subscribe to this podcast backlogged episodes of it on iTunes. There's a link down there for that. And on the support page, you can get up-to-date episodes sent straight to your email inbox for a small monthly fee. We send them out on a weekly basis. And yeah, that's it. Cool? Cool. On with the show. Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and you are listening to the latest episode of the Needle Drop Podcast, where we do interviews from artists and content creators, with artists and content creators from around the internet. And in this episode, star of stage and screen, also rapper and musician. And I've done an interview with him before, but now we're sort of doing it solo. Mr. Daveed Diggs, how you doing, dude?
I'm pretty good, man.
I went a little old school with the star of stage and screen.
Yeah.
I thought that
it was great. It was
just throwing it back a little bit.
Felt like Charlton Heston or something.
Okay, man. Thanks for coming on the show. It's been a while, and a lot has happened since we last talked. I believe our last conversation was shortly after Clipping came out with kind of their first mixtape, I believe.
Wow. Yeah. I think you're right.
And then you guys got signed to Sub Pop. You dropped that follow-up record.
Right.
And since then, you have landed on a bill of what essentially right now is pretty much the hottest thing on Broadway, the new Hamilton musical.
Yeah.
Wherein you play two characters.
Correct.
So fill me in a little bit on how you sort of came to be involved in this project, because something we didn't really go over in our last talk, I don't think, at least not in depth, is that, you have a pretty intensive theater background as well. I believe you've been in a number of sort of productions, and you've also done advertisements as well, one of which I believe you wanted me to sort of keep under wraps for a little while, like just before the release of the second Clipping record, where you played a great producer, by the way.
Thank you.
In sort of that Austin Mahoney commercial, I believe, where you were super convincing.
I thought so.
You seemed,
it was some of my best work.
You seemed really concerned with him sort of jumbling the words of the song up with like breakfast foods.
It was really it was a really intense scene. It was kind of high drama. Shout out to Austin for being such a really fantastic actor.
And recently, after you sort of pointing me in the direction, I've caught you in a few Law and Order episodes as well.
Yeah, those are all recent developments.
Yeah. So I mean, tell me a little bit about your acting background now, and then from there, sort of how you happened to be in this Hamilton musical.
Word. Well, yeah. I mean, I've been acting for a very long time, mostly in plays, and I sort of was a very reluctant theater major in college. I went to Brown, which meant that I swore I was going to like create my major and do some really like cool, like hippie arts and education, like activism thing. And then I looked around and it had finished the theater major already, because I just liked taking silly acting classes. So that became what I did. And but that was never my intention. But I was always like doing plays and stuff. I'd done them in high school. I did them in college, and then I went back to Oakland after college and kept doing them. I managed to sort of piece together a living doing that between that and like teaching poetry classes in middle schools and stuff. But yeah, I was doing a lot of theater in the Bay, and then so when I moved to Los Angeles, though, after which is sort of when clipping really started taking form, wasn't until like 2012 when I moved down to Los Angeles, or 2011, I guess. But I moved there, and like I am really not good at auditioning for commercials and things like that. Basically, like I had done a bunch of plays in the Bay Area, and nobody knew who I was, and like no one was really interested in representing me. Except I could get a commercial agent. It's very easy to get a commercial agent. If you show up and you can like read at like a 5th grade level, you can probably get a commercial agent. So I did that, and I was basically like the extent of my acting work was auditioning for commercials. So I was really like focused on this clipping stuff because that was way more fun, and I was working with 2 of my best friends, and we were making stuff that we thought was really dope. So acting just kind of took a back seat, and I would audition, when I could get around to it. And then we started touring about, so you sort of know the clipping history. So
yeah.
Those albums came out, and we started touring a bunch, and that was cool. Meanwhile, I had also been hit up by a mentor of mine from back in the Bay Area, Mark Bamuti Joseph, to sort of concurrently be touring a piece that he had written called Word Becomes Flesh. That was like a story. It initially was a solo performance piece of his that he toured all around the world in 2007. But he reimagined it for a group of 5 Black men. It was this sort of choreo poem thing. So I was also doing that. So basically I lived on the road a lot. And while I was doing that is when I got hit up by Tommy Kail, the director of Hamilton, to come out and be in a reading of Hamilton. And so the backstory of that, actually, we have to go back to the Bay Area for a second.
Sure. Yeah. What's the story behind that connection?
So Lin-Manuel, who wrote the show, and Tommy are both part of this thing called Freestyle Love Supreme that they sort of formed while they were at Wesleyan, but had become like a imagine sort of like a faster, like more theatrical Wild 'N Out, or maybe less theatrical. I don't know. It feels a little more like a concert, but also like there seems to be like more acting going on. And it's live and entirely improvised. But all in verse. And so anyway, I became a part of that group because another founding member of that group named Anthony Veneziali and me were both called to substitute teach the same class in Marin County due to some clerical error. And we were both there. So we just fucking team topped this class, and I gave him a ride home. And he was like, we were talking about rapping and talking about acting, and he was like, oh, we do the same things. Hey, I work with these people. He was trying to found a West Coast version of this group called The Freeze. And so I became a part of that. And then while being a part of that, Freestyle Love Supreme, which is based in New York, when they couldn't fill a whole performance, which happened often because In the Heights was on Lynn's last play. In the Heights was on Broadway at the time, so like often performers couldn't make it, so they would fly me out to do these freestyle shows. So that's how I know those guys, is really through this weird like freestyle theater hybrid thing. And sometime in the midst of doing a Word Becomes Flesh tour, Freestyle Love Supreme calls and has me come out to the Super Bowl when it was in New Orleans to rap on Sports Nation about sports celebrities live in the week leading up to the Super Bowl. You can watch these clips on YouTube. They're not good.
Oh my God.
But so we do this gig, and it was really fun. These are great guys, and it's always a good time. And that gig, I was in a moment in my life where I wasn't saying no to anything that paid money. And while we were there, Tommy mentioned this musical, this new thing Lynn was writing, and asked would I come out to Vassar to do a reading of that in like a month. And I said, sure, send me the stuff. And he sent me the music, and I'd never done a musical before, but I did, I listened to, these were like Lynn's sort of crappy demos of all of the songs that he had written so far, and they were so smart, and so like sort of fulfilling even from a rapper perspective. You hear this idea of like hip hop theater sometimes and it just makes you cringe. Yeah. Particularly if you do the rap thing for real, because you just know it's going to be bad. Yeah. And well, this wasn't
I guess the whole concept of hip hop theater, while obviously this isn't the inception of it right here, like you just said, sort of the idea of these two worlds kind of colliding does elicit a cringe, just like you said, or it could. I guess, in what way were these demos kind of succeeding where previous efforts that you had seen were kind of failing?
Well, I think because nothing was forced. This is interesting to say and being part of clipping, but like rap is about authenticity, right? I mean, Sure. It's about the presentation of authenticity. So even with clipping, where we don't use the first person at all, like that choice is made actually to elicit a greater feeling of authenticity, because makes it easier for us to participate in the kinds of rap music we're making. So like I think that's why you get that cringe, because when you're smashing these two worlds together, it feels like the rapping is going to be a gimmick. It feels like it's going to be something to get the kids in the seats and like do a thing, But when I heard these demos, Lynn is a good rapper. He's a really good rapper. He's a great writer, and he's also just a super musical theater head. And he was so also enamored with his subjects. He read this biography of Alexander Hamilton and totally like fell for him. So he wrote this thing that was so... Everything about it was good. It was like technically good. The story was really engaging and interesting, and none of it felt forced. It all felt like really honest, and not like rap was being used as sort of as a gimmick. But instead, it was the only way that he could figure out to tell this story about a guy who wrote his way off of the island that he lived on, and consequently like wrote his way into success and into ruin. So it's really like rap music is used because it's the best way to tell the story, along with a lot of other kinds of music. That's the other thing about it, is like, all the press around it says that it's a rap show, but it just has a lot of rapping in it. But there's tons of jazz, there's tons of like super just show tune, Pan Alley feeling stuff. It's all over the place. A lot of R&B music, and his reference points were always whatever that particular song needed. So
yeah, it's like musically, if you listen to the cast recording, it's really a mix of everything.
Right.
Yeah, I think in previous sort of attempts to incorporate the sounds of hip hop into musical theater, maybe there kind of would have been a feeling of maybe the person writing the song being sort of out of touch, and then sort of incorporating that just as an attempt to get the kids in the seats, like you said. But hip hop's at a point now where it's not as young as it used to be. Exactly. And you have these classic records that people hold as in high regard as like Nirvana's Nevermind or something, you know? And now hip hop isn't just, the language of the young generation. It's kind of a part of the modern mainstream vernacular, you know? So in a way, it sort of seems like this is coming at a very appropriate time where even people who are in that 30, 40, 50-year-old range who, you know, might typically go to a Broadway show are familiar with the idea of hip hop. They're familiar with the concepts behind hip hop.
Absolutely.
So what they may be seeing on stage, because you guys take a lot of the hip hop vernacular to incorporate that into the lyrics of the show. You know, you're not like talking as if, you know, it's the 1700s or the 1800s.
Right.
It's a very modern feel to the language of the show. So, you know, what's being said on stage isn't really alien to anybody, and the juxtaposition of the new and the old in the story is very obvious and kind of humorous.
Right. Well, and I think also that was part of the point, was in order to really care about these characters, which we've, you know, how many times have you learned something about George Washington and forgotten it immediately? The idea was like to make them feel contemporary, to make them feel like somebody you know. And you're right, hip hop is everywhere, and whether you consciously are a hip hop fan or not, like you listen to it, there's nobody, you can't tell me you've never heard a rap song, you know.
Sure, yeah,
it's in your commercials.
At this point, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, it's to sort of detour for a quick second. It's just sort of funny to see that that's sort of where the current state of hip hop's relevancy is, because it seems like now at this peak of hip hop's relevance, where it's really everywhere. It seems like everybody has access to it. Most people have at least, you know, a baseline grasp of what to expect when someone tells them they're going to hear a hip hop song. Simultaneously, there's also like this movement of people within the community who sort of come off like purists and, you know, sort of want to maintain the status quo. And that means sort of saying who can participate, who can't, what can or can't be said, just kind of in a weird attempt to sort of hold on to what they grew up with in terms of hip hop. But now as it's grown and things like this production that you're involved in have occurred, you know, the whole landscape is changing.
Right. It's true. I mean, but I think actually, like, you know, our production is pretty like great for those 90s rap purists, you know.
Sure.
That was really Lynn's golden era, and that's the stuff that he's referencing and writing about. But I agree with you that you know, the landscape is changing and continues to change. And I think, but it's so funny, like, you know, for folks who don't participate in it, like if you're not making rap songs or any kind of music, like generally, right, the best music for you is the music you were listening to when you were like in your late teens and early 20s. Like,
sure, that's like what you're the most nostalgic for.
Yeah, that's when it should stop. So,
that's when what should stop?
That's when rap music should stop. Is when whenever you were like 18, you're like, yeah, that's the golden age of hip hop right there.
Okay.
Like everything after that is crap. You know, like which of course is garbage. We would all be really upset if it stopped. But you know, you got it. Those are the things that make you feel young and powerful, and like that's. Yeah. That's what you go back to.
Considering that hip hop is so the roots of it, especially throughout the 90s, are sort of based in those young and powerful feelings. You know, and rock obviously went through this phase as well. You know, do you see the genre sort of gracefully transitioning into this era where it might be able to move away from some of those feelings, or maybe incorporate more ideas in the mainstream from artists who are taking kind of a softer approach? I mean, I think it's already happening in a sense with people like Drake, you know, being as popular and as relevant as he is, who, you know, widely acknowledges the fact that he's not the hardest rapper.
Right. Yeah, I think, you know, the hip hop in general has always been such a wide open genre. There's always been everything in it. But in terms of like what the mainstream is accepting, it tends to exist on kind of a pendulum, right? Like we get really hard for a second, and then it sort of swings back the other way, and we get our Jiggy era, we get our are softer stuff, and then it's going to swing back, and we get some more gangster rap, and now we're sitting in the middle of a Drake phase, and it's pretty soft, and we'll maybe it'll swing back the other way. But I do think the internet and access to all different kinds of music and like the different ways that artists have to gain popularity is sort of helping to make the mainstream image of the genre a little bit wider, a little more all-inclusive than it ever has been. Because you look like guys like Earl Sweatshirt too, who's like such a great rap and is enjoying like some amount of mainstream success. I mean, certainly not a Drake, but there is certainly room in the mainstream consciousness for a guy like Earl.
Yeah, I mean, I think if more people like him were to come out, hip hop could sort of work itself through sort of the 90s introspective, depressing grunge phase that rock had going for a little while. I think rap sort of went through its era of sort of hard rock, hair metal excess, and now it's due for some sad, introspective, sort of really depressing, sort of reflective music.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's certainly a lot of good stuff in that world out there. I think we'll always need all of it. The thing about rap music is it's still one of its main functions is always, I think, going to be like as a party soundtrack. And like I still don't like to party to sad music, but I'm old, so maybe that's, I don't know. Maybe that's not for me anymore. I'll just keep listening to my like early 2000s hyphy songs and and every party the kids are going to will be like real sad.
All right. Okay. So one more question about I guess the concept of this before we go into more specifics about, sort of your role in the show. I believe I caught a clip of you online talking about how, you're getting your reparations by doing this show. Is that true? Did I hear that right?
It's a good line. I mean, it's the way I ended my BET cypher verse.
Yes. That's it. Okay, so
playing these dead presidents, I'm getting my reparations.
Yes. So,
good line.
So give me your point of view and your opinion on basically, this whole idea that you're using what's essentially a modern Black art form to sort of express this story or take part in expressing this story about, I guess, this very old and this very white part of American history.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that comes up for me all the time is that it actually is not a white part of American history. That, Black people were around all the time.
Of course.
In fact, building just about everything that we're talking about in the show.
Yep.
And I think one of the things that the show does in a really cool way is sort of allows that narrative of that this country was built by these people to still exist, but in this very subversive way, put Black and brown faces at the forefront of it, and Black and brown music at the forefront of it. So as opposed to having this fight about who really built the country, which is a thing that we like to yell about all the time, but doesn't. The thing about Lynn and the thing about this show is it's patriotic. It is a pro-America show. It's about sort of the greatness of the democracy that we created when it's at its best, and how it has room for disagreement, and how when it is working, it encourages argument and is imperfect and is always being fixed and tinkered with. So it keeps that narrative and just puts people of color at the forefront of it. And, I get so many tweets from kids, now, like looking at, who are tweeting statues of Jefferson or whatever, and being like, SMH, this doesn't look anything like David Diggs, or whatever, which is, for me as a human being, pretty weird. But I think there's a certain amount of significance to that I think is important, that I sort of wish I had when I was 13. I kind of wish, my 13-year-old like theater nerd self would have been able to see this show, because it opens the world up a little bit, and it's, at the time when our president is who our president is, and this world should be opened up, and it gives it. Certainly, when I started working on it, it gave me a sort of sense of ownership over the story of the founding of this country and this democracy that I didn't have before. So I do hope that it is operating that way for sort of younger folks. And
these feelings of patriotism and the inner workings of our democracy that you're sort of talking about that are reflected in the play, are these feelings that you personally feel like you have even in the midst of this very chaotic election season that we're having?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really complicated question. I think I have them in this really idealistic sense, in the sense that we all approach it when we go to work and work on this play. I do believe in people in general. Like I'm a pretty optimistic person as far as I tend to think people are good. So and I think there is an idea about how America works that could really capitalize on that. In practice, I think that almost never happens, and I think there are so much, there is such a history of like beyond slavery and everything, just of abuse to minorities and women, and it's pretty easy to be pessimistic about, and then you listen to Trump rhetoric and you get even more depressed and all that. But I think somewhere in there it still exists for me. I still like living here. I feel like every election season I start to be like, oh man, if such and such wins, I'm moving to Canada or whatever.
Yeah, that's what everybody says every time.
Right.
But I mean, it's as scary as it can be. Simultaneously, I feel like this dissonance is just kind of a natural part of the process of letting everybody sort of have their own opinion. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's and I think one of the things we love to look at the poles of it. We love to look at the most extremes on either side.
Oh yeah, which the internet sort of indulges that desire.
Everything does
so much.
Yeah.
I think if it weren't for the internet kind of amplifying and platforming the most polarizing views on both sides of the aisle, I don't think people like Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump would be as prominent as they are in this election. We'd essentially be talking a Hillary, Ted Cruz election already. But now there are sort of these loud voices on both sides of the aisle that can't really be ignored.
Right. I think you're right, and I think the majority of the country is actually much more centrist around most issues than we are allowed to imagine. But I also, I've also only ever lived on the coast, so what do I know?
All right. So, going into the characters that you play in the show, and sort of using to springboard from that the story that you told of that, some of the kids sort of messaging you pictures of Jefferson and so on and so forth, and maybe being a point of inspiration for some of these young kids. Give us an idea of what you personally do in the show with your character, and sort of, how you feel about the role that you play, and sort of how you feel it reflects on you as an actor, and the message that you think that your character sends within the overall story.
Word. Well, so in the first act, I'm playing the Marquis de Lafayette, who I certainly didn't know anything about before I started working on this show.
Yeah.
But left at 19 years old, left France and came to the U.S. to fight in the Revolution, in the American Revolution, which a lot of people, which was kind of a thing in France. The idea of American democracy was really sexy. The French were trying to work out their own ideas about having a revolution and starting a democracy there, and the America was a little bit further along in the process. So
people were leaving to go join the terrorist sect in America.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I got it.
So we, so Lafayette comes over and meets George Washington and ends up becoming a really great general, and really became an American hero after the war, and after the French Revolution too. He comes back and is throwing ticker tape parades everywhere he goes, and women are wearing gloves with his face on them. He was a real superhero on a lunchbox type dude. So he became this kind of celebrity, but when we're meeting him, he's young and just sort of trying to figure it out. And over the course of the first act, we sort of see him become a general in the ways that it relates to Hamilton's story of also becoming George Washington's aide-de-camp. And eventually the Secretary of the Treasury. So, but yeah, Lafayette, I think, in this show sort of embodies that kind of idealism, and this kind of, and this sort of ideal that I think America still preaches and doesn't, and it clearly doesn't practice very much about, this is a place where anyone can come and be what they want to be.
Sure.
So, Lafayette comes here with these dreams of being a general and does just that, and works his ass off and impresses everybody in the process. But he's French. And Hamilton does the same thing. They have this great line, towards the end of the first act, "Immigrants, we get the job done," which gets a great response every night, given our political climate, right?
Sure.
But, yeah. But yeah, so he's sort of embodying this sort of ideal of America where, this place is for everyone, and immigrants who come here are the ones building it, are really the ones doing the work and building it and shaping it. And then in the second act, I come back. So Lafayette leaves and goes back to France to deal with his own revolution. And I come back as Thomas Jefferson, who has been in France for the entire duration of the war, never had to fight in the war at all. He's been just hanging out in France, being a rock star because he was a symbol of American democracy. And he comes back and is just made Secretary of State. Just a letter just shows up from George Washington. "You're the first Secretary of State, dude. You didn't have to do anything for it. You're awesome." And this and we learn all this in Jefferson's sort of entrance song, which is this sort of jazzy, throwback jazzy number called "What Did I Miss?" And that sort of epitomizes to me who Jefferson is, right? Just the most privileged, has just been handed everything. A really smart guy, and in our version of him, a really charismatic guy as well. But has never had to work for anything. And in fact, when we meet him, he's just being wheeled around by his slaves. He barely touches the ground that whole number. So, then he goes up against, he starts going up against Hamilton in cabinet meetings, and Hamilton sort of represents everything that he doesn't. Hamilton has worked for everything. Hamilton is, and they also differ on most things. Specifically, who this idea of like paying off the war debt, this idea of slavery, which Hamilton was always a staunch abolitionist. Jefferson was absolutely not.
So you're kind of the heel at this point in the production.
Yeah. And so Jefferson becomes basically a villain, and ends up being for a long time sort of a foil to Hamilton, who sort of wins at every turn, and then eventually becomes a foil to Burr as well. But yeah, I think for me the takeaway from for Jefferson is just like that, this kind of, he wrote some things that are, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He wrote some documents that I think most of us, even like most liberal-minded folks, can all still really stand behind. And he was still a piece of shit. And I think that's important to sort of recognize that those two things are possible.
It seems like, he was a great political and mind, and especially when it came to the law as well, but you could have that talent but also be a shitty person. Right,
exactly. And he was a smart, he was a great inventor. He invented a lot of things. He was like a total weirdo also. I mean, and I think that's sort of part of the charm and the draw of Jefferson also, is that he just, his insane amount of privilege just gave him this like freedom to just think, and all of this free time. So he just made shit. He just did chemistry experiments and like, and shipped things over from France that he, macaroni and cheese. We eat macaroni and cheese because of Thomas Jefferson. That's a true thing. Yeah, I mean, so that there are, but yeah, obviously his owning of slaves and his like inability, despite his like romantic relationships with Sally Hemings, which are super well documented, his like inability to reconcile that with the fact that he was owning these people is unforgivable, and we should have no way to really conceive that that's okay. But he's still a smart guy, and we can use a lot of the things that he created.
Well, sure. I think that's essentially, I think the takeaway from any significant part of history. The thing is that at no point in history are even when we're at our most well-intentioned, are we doing anything perfectly? So I think it's best to just kind of take away from that, with hindsight, the better things that did come out of a certain situation, or at least the opportunities to learn from the mistakes that were made, and just try to move on as best that you can, knowing that even, with your best intentions, you're probably not doing everything 100% correctly too.
Right, exactly. And I think one of my favorite things about this show is that it presents all of these, all of the founding fathers and mothers as flawed, as real people, as opposed to, we don't hear this story about George Washington chopping down a cherry tree and never lying and stuff in our show, which is also not true. But yeah, but beyond that, like that's not who these people were, and it actually like has always made it impossible for me to care about them, because nobody's perfect, and we can't, and so I like that we don't have to ignore the fact that Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Which we do, or I did. So I was told to so much of the time when I was learning about who Thomas Jefferson was, right? Because that actually stopped me from learning anything interesting about him.
That's just an interesting point of view, because it seems like, it's really an opportunity to truly learn something about the founding fathers, as opposed to just kind of, looking at this fake grand perfect sort of painting of them from the point of view of somebody who, whether they're white, brown, black, whatever, they know that, the narrative is bullshit
Right.
from the go. It seems like, the production is taking a much more reasonable approach to history as opposed to, it's either grand, it's perfect, we can't question the founding fathers, or, the other point of view, on the other side of that, the polar opposite of that is anybody who looks at anyone 1,000 years ago and says those people were barbarians, essentially.
Right.
Whereas it's only a matter of time before there's a future society that looks upon the society that you lived in and says, wow, everything was so fucked up back then. How did they even live?
Right. I mean, we can look at so many things that we're doing right now and say that even in our own time, and I imagine they could then too. I mean, that's that's the thing about it, right? Like, history is all about who tells the story. So
yes, okay, that's actually a really amazing point to I think to leave this on. Before I totally let you go, because I know you're a very busy person. What are your plans right now that you have, or ambitions as far as music goes? Or, are you just like sinking your teeth into theater and acting right now?
No, man, we've been making so much music. Bill and Jonathan were just here. They just spent a week out here.
Wow.
And we recorded a ton of songs. And so, I think Jonathan is doing sort of the rough mixes of those right now to see kind of what shook out and see if there's a direction. A lot of this was solo stuff for me. And then a couple clipping things that we had to finish up. And there is a totally finished clipping project. I can't give any dates on it yet, but it's I can be very hopeful that it will be out this year. So there's one of those. There's another one in the works. There's tons of clipping music, and there's also a bunch of like my own sort of solo stuff that I'm really excited about, because I haven't really put anything out since Small Things to a Giant in 2012. So,
yeah. And how has your music sort of your solo stuff, has that progressed in any way significantly since that last album? Like, are you going for any different sounds, or are you taking some risks, or any of the ideas or concepts that you sort of have explored through the last few clipping records kind of bleeding into this new solo record?
I think so. I mean, like I said, I'm still waiting for the songs to shake down to figure like what would constitute a full length project. So I might just end up leaking songs that don't fit into that anyway, because I don't really know what that is yet. But I do think, I think the music's better. I think, working with clipping has given me a higher amount of quality control, sort of, which is good. But also, I still write about Oakland all the time, but I think I'm in a different place now. So there's a lot of I don't know. The stuff so far has been a little bit angrier, a little like more distrustful. I think maybe because I'm in this position where like all of a sudden people who I don't know are trying to talk to me all the time, and like this rap music is a thing that I've been doing for so long and nobody cared. And
I get it. You're on your Drake shit now.
I'm on my Drake shit now. Yeah. I'm super on my Drake shit. It's really like
no new friends.
It's a lot of no new friends. It's a lot of like lonely, like sad songs. A lot of like sort of singing. No, I mean, but I still ultimately like I said, like my real era is like the hyphy era. So I'm still looking for whatever the modern version of that is, right? So I think the stuff sounds probably clubbier than one would expect it to sound if you knew me, but that's just where I've sort of always been at. But I don't know. I'm excited about it. I'm excited about the writing. I think I'm a better writer now than I was then, and I think I'm working with better producers now than I was then. So I'm pretty excited to see how it all comes out and to try and put something together, or not, or to just start putting songs out, because what I would like to not do is just sit on them for a bunch of years and then hate them by the time they come out. That would be bad.
This solo release for right now, is it looking at a self-release, or are you dealing with a label at the moment? And is clipping still sort of in the works with Sub Pop?
Yeah, clipping. This next clipping project will be on Sub Pop, and yeah, so we're still working with them, and my solo thing is looking for a home. I'm talking with some label folks, but I'm also exploring the options of putting it out myself. I'm sort of, and maybe both. I don't know. I'm sort of interested in whatever like gets the music out and is going to have the greatest reach, but also wait the least amount of time. So I'm navigating those things right now.
Okay. All right. My guest on this episode has been David Diggs of not only clipping, also a solo rapper, artist, singer-songwriter, and of the Hamilton musical as well. Where can I direct people to just kind of, check you out? Is it, a Twitter page or a solo site or something? Or
Yeah. Twitter, David Diggs. Facebook, David Diggs. Instagram, David Diggs. DavidDiggs.com is going to be redesigned soon. Right now, you can just get Small Things to a Giant there. That's the only thing that's there.
Okay.
But we're working on re-upping that into a more useful site as well. So I guess keep your eyes tuned to that. But basically, David Diggs on all the various social media. I do have a Snapchat. I never use it.
Okay.
Maybe that'll change.
All right. We'll link everybody to those social media platforms. And I just want to thank you for being on, man.
Hey, thank you, man. Always a pleasure.